So we studied in terms of pragmatics and meaning. We studied what it means to know or what it means to understand a sentence, right? And we said that in order to understand a sentence, you need three kinds of knowledge, right? The knowledge of entailment, the knowledge of presupposition, and then the knowledge of implicature, right? So these are related because they are all what we call implied messages, okay? They are all different types of implied messages, so they are related, okay? So as you know, the entailment is the kind of literal meaning of a word or an expression, right? And in order to test for an entailment, you can use like, what's the test for the entailment? In all cases where, and then you have the statement where X is true, it must be true that Y. Or you can use P and Q, sorry. So you can use that as a test for an entailment. In all cases where P is true, it must always be true that Q is true too, okay? Or you can use another test for the entailment is in fact and but, right? So you join P and Q, you join P and Q. If it sounds strange, then you have an entailment, okay? Because an entailment is redundant, right? Because it's already implied in the message. So if you say in fact and but, and you feel some redundancy, then it is an entailment, okay? So that's how to test for entailment. Now, for the presupposition, it's also a type of entailment, but it's an entailment that projects. It's an entailment that projects, meaning that projects across negation, across questions, across modalization, and so on. Okay? So it's the same as entailment, but it's a special kind of entailment because it projects across negation, question, or modalization. Meaning Q is true, whatever, regardless of what you do to P, okay? If you negate P, let's say if you negate P, this is negation. If you negate P, Q is still true. If you question P, Q is still true. If you modelize P, like perhaps P, Q is always true, still true. So it's a special kind because it projects across negation, question, or modalization. So that's presupposition. So it's a special kind of entailment, right? So it's like higher level of entailment, in other words. So to test whether something is a presupposition or not, just try negating it, try to question the original statement, or try to modelize the original statement with perhaps. And if Q is still true, then you have a presupposition, okay? So it's a higher level of entailment. Entailment is like lowest level of implied meaning, right? For the last thing, moving to implicature. Implicature is context dependent, right? So it depends on the context. There's no, entailment is a logic relationship, right? Logical relationship between two statements. But the implicature is not logical, and it depends on the context. So there's no logical relationship between two statements, and it involves some kind of maxim, cooperation or violation, right? So if you think about Grice's maxim, right? Grice said that people cooperate typically when they communicate, right? And there is this unsaid and unwritten rule that we cooperate with our conversationalist, right? Co-interactant, that we tend to say things that are true, right? So that's the maxim of quality. We tend to give enough information, that's the maxim of quantity, and so on, right? And we try to be clear, that's the maxim of manner, and we try to be relevant, that's maxim of relevance or relation, right? So in terms of maxims, so we have the cooperation principle, right? So we give enough information to people, we don't lie. In other words, we say things that are true, we say things that are clear, and we say things that are relevant. So that's cooperation principle with 4 maxims, right? And what you can do, what people can do with the cooperation principle is that there is standard implicature, and also there's the implicature that arises out of flouting one of the maxims. Okay. So the implied message, an implied message can arise out of standard implicature or flouting of one of the maxims, right? So let's start with flouting one of the maxims. So when you flout, it means you deliberately violate the maxims. You deliberately, meaning you intentionally do it, okay? So that's when you flout it, okay? So the maxim says, like, one of the maxims says, like, you should not lie, right? You should tell people the truth. But when you deliberately violate it, you lie, right? You lie. And the other person knows that you are lying too, okay? So both sides know. Both sides are aware that you are deliberately violating the maxim. And the implied message arises out of that, out of mutual understanding that one person is deliberately violating the maxims, okay? So as an example, let me give you this one to show you how, what it means to flout the maxims. If somebody asks, will Al Kyung-won come to class today? Will Al Kyung-won come to class today? And then another person answers, either he comes or he won't. Either he comes or he won't. What's the implied message here that B is trying to say? So it has to do with one of the maxims, right? So it means B, so the implied message is B doesn't care whether Al Hyung-won will come to class or not today. That's why he answers it with this, right? And what maxim is involved in that is the maxim of quantity, right? Because is either he comes or he won't. There's no information, right? As to there's no specific information as to this is too much information in a sense because it's all that can be, right? Either he comes or he won't come. There are only two cases that are possible, right? Either he comes or he won't come. So he B intentionally or deliberately violating the maxim of quantity just to communicate that he doesn't care, okay, about Al Kyung-won's presence today, for example. So that's the deliberately violating. And A knows that B is violating the maxim deliberately too. Okay? So flouting the maxim involves deliberately violating the maxim. Okay? And another situation is when it's raining outside and somebody say, yeah, it's a good day, isn't it? Right? Ironically. When you say it ironically, like it's a good day, isn't it, when it's raining outside, the other person knows that you are being ironical, you are being sarcastic, right? So that's deliberately violating the maxim of quality, right? Because it has to do with false information, right? So that's flouting the maxims. Now, if you look at the other case of implicature, is standard implicature. It arises when there's no flouting of the maxim, when a person doesn't violate the maxim. Okay? So, like, if another example, A asks, what's the time now? Do you have the time? What's the time now? What time is it now? And then B answers, the metro, the last metro just went by. Okay, the last metro just went by. Supposing that it's a Saturday, so the last metro is perhaps at 11 in Seoul, right? So in this case, A can guess, right, that the meaning that B wants to say that it's after 11 p.m., right? So that's the implied message. And that's the standard implicature, meaning there's no flouting of the maxim, and A has to work out that meaning that it's after 11 p.m., assuming that B follows the maxims, right, strictly. Like B is trying to be relevant to the topic, right? And by being relevant, A has to do further guess that, well, what's the last time, what's the last metro, right, that operates on a Saturday night, for example, and he can arrive at that meaning. So the standard implicature doesn't involve any flouting of the maxim, but the flouting of the maxim, which is a different case, will involve some kind of deliberate violation of the maxims. Okay? So either way, you can get the implied message because of the maxims. Okay? So can we move on to this exam preparation sheet, and can we discuss this question on part 3, which is on page maybe on page 3. Okay. The first example, do you know how to get to Apgujeong? And B answers, I've got a map in my bag. What's the implied message here? What's the implied message that B wants to say? What's the implied message here? Does he know or he doesn't know? B does not know, right? How to get there. But B is willing to look. But B is willing to find out. So that's the implied message that he wants to convey to A, right? Now, is this a flouting? Like, is B flouting any of the maxims? No, right? He just follows the maxim. He cooperates in order to give the answer that A is looking for, right? And that meaning here, the implied message here, arises out of the standard implicature, right? So you can write down standard implicature. And it has to do with the maxim of relation or maxim of relevance, right? Because A can figure this meaning out because he assumes that B is being relevant in terms of the answer, right? That this is the answer that's relevant to the question of direction to Apgujeong, right? So he has to figure this out on his own, right? Assuming that B is relevant, okay? So it's a standard implicature, and the maxim that's involved in deriving this implicature is the maxim of relevance, okay? So that's the first one. The second one, what do we have? The second one is, do you like anchovies? Anchovies are like little fish, right? Korean people eat anchovies as panchan. And then, so A asks, do you like anchovies? B answers, does a hippo like mud? So what's the implied meaning? You know, the implied meaning is context dependent, right? So the implied meaning that we are going to say, that we are going to talk about here is only specific to this context. So what's the meaning of B in relation to A? So do you like anchovies? So B, assuming that he is being cooperative. So does he like or does he not like? Does hippo like mud? Does a hippo like mud? Yes, it does, right? Hippo likes to, you know, sleep in mud all day. So B, in this case, implies that B likes anchovies in the same way as a hippo likes mud, right? Now, this is a flouting of the maxim, right? He answers a question with a question, right? So he deliberately flouts the maxim, and it's the maxim of, let's see, manner. The maxim of manner says that we have to be clear and we have to present the information in a way that's accessible to the hearer. But here, he answers a question with a question, which people should not do, right? Yet they do it on a daily basis. So the maxim of manner is perhaps being flouted here. And A has to think about the question that B asks, right, in order to arrive at this interpretation. Okay? So let's look at number 3, and I'll have you do number 4 and 5. Number 3, you see a conversation between two people. Can we trust Krista? Let me see. Number 3, can we trust Krista to do as we tell him and defend the interests, meaning the advantage or the profits, whatever you want to name it, of the English department in the university-wide meeting today. So Krista here is acting as the representative of the English department in the university setting. And then B answers, Krista is a soldier. What is the implied message that B wants to convey here? Can we trust or can we not trust Krista? What's the implied message here? So let's suppose that the department sends Krista as a representative of the English department at a university meeting today, and he has to talk about, how to get funding for the department, right? And B says, Krista is a soldier. So, what's the implied message of B? B wants to say that we can or cannot trust Krista. We can trust, right? B says, we can trust Krista. Just by using that answer, right? So, how did we get this implied message? Well, we have to look at the answer, right? Krista is a soldier. So, being a soldier, what does it mean to be a soldier in a particular culture or in Korean culture? When we talk about being a soldier, what do we usually think about? A soldier is supposed to be, right? Is supposed to be patriotic, right? Supposed to be that, right? And a soldier is supposed to listen. And a soldier is supposed to isn't supposed to question. Authority, right? In other words, they have to obey, right? A soldier has to obey other soldiers who are higher ranked than him, right? So he has to follow orders, in other words, right? Without question, right? Just like he doesn't have any brain, right? And a soldier is supposed to be devoted to his duty, right? So when we think about a soldier is supposed to be all these, right? So B answers, Krista is a soldier, then it implies that we can trust him because he is patriotic to the Department of English. He will listen and he will not question what other people in the department say, and he will be devoted to his duty to the English department. So in this case, we can trust Krista, right? So all of these qualifications of a soldier, right, came and then tell you what B means, right? So in this case, it's a flouting, right, deliberate flouting of the maxim of quality flouting. Why? Because in reality, is he a soldier? No, obviously no, right? From the context, obviously no, right? He's not a soldier. So you are deliberately saying something that's false, meaning sort of lying. So you're deliberately saying something that's false, like give false information. So it's flouting of the maxim of quality, right? Because it's not true. And yet, A also knows that it's not true, Krista is not a soldier. But by using that kind of metaphor, we can arrive at this implied meaning. Okay? 4 is 3 times Cha So-yeon counted it, whatever it is. So you have to read on. $1.87. And the next day would be S. Kyung-won's birthday. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the couch and howl. So why is Cha So-yeon howling here? And which maxim implies this? Okay? So you have to figure that out. Why is she howling? Okay? And number 5, what might be the implicature or the implied message of you can have some of the food on the table, and what maxim implies this? Okay? So I'll give you maybe 3 minutes to figure out why Cha So-yeon is howling. For the sake of understanding, 3 times, so she did it 3 times, right? Cha So-yeon counted it. What is it here? What does it refer to? It refers to here, right? Money, $1.87, okay? It refers to money. Sometimes pronouns can refer to things that come before, and other times pronouns can refer to things that come after, okay? In this case, it's after the pronoun. So, why is she howling? Can you tell me? Why is she howling? She's happy? She's crying because she is happy? No, she is sad, right? And she is not crying because of pain, physical pain, because she broke her leg. No, not like that, right? But she's crying sadly because she, well, what does it have to do? You know, given the context, you should be able to tell, right? She has this amount of money, $1.87, and the next day would be S. Kyung-won's birthday, and she cannot do anything. So what might be the reason that she's crying? Because she's crying because she cannot buy him a birthday present, right? Because she doesn't have enough money, right? In other words. So she's howling because she cannot buy S. Kyung-won a birthday present because she doesn't have enough money. Right? And the maxim that implies this is the maxim of relevance, right? The maxim of relevance. Because as a reader, you can guess that meaning because you see the amount of dollar here, right? Is $1.87, which is like a very little amount of money. So, and then you have to connect that to birthday, right? So what people do with money on someone's birthday, right? And she cannot do anything, and she just flops down and cries. So that means you have to make the connection as a reader, and it's through the maxim of relevance that everything is connected here, right? Low amount of money, and then birthday, what people usually do on someone's birthday, and also the crying. So you could get that meaning because of the maxim of relevance. Okay? And this is standard implicature, right? There's no flouting of any maxim. So the writer of this passage tries to tell you that she's crying because she doesn't have enough money without having to tell you explicitly. So that's the implied message. Okay? So when you come across a reading passage, whether it's on TOEFL or TOEIC, you have to make that kind of inference, or you have to make out that kind of implied meaning, right? Through the maxim of relevance or other maxims. Okay? Now, in number 5, so we get number 4 down. So number 5, what might be the implicature of you can have some of the food on the table, and what maxim implies this? So you can have some food on the table. So if, let's say, Gi-ho comes into my office and asks me, do you have, I'm hungry, okay? He always says that, I'm hungry. He comes into my office and says, I'm hungry, like that. So I usually tell him, you know, this is not a supermarket, it's my office, okay? So, and if I'm kind, I can say to him, you can have some of the food on the table. What do I want to say to him? Of course, he can have some food on the table, right? We know that. But what else do I imply there? You can have some food on the table. Assuming that I'm true, assuming that I give enough information to him. So what kind of implied message that I want to say to him? The implied message is, please leave some food for me, right? Do not eat it all, right? So don't eat all. Eat only some, right? You can have some food on the table. Eat only some and don't eat all, because that's the maxim of quantity, right? The maxim of quantity. There's no flouting here, so it's standard implicature. So the maxim of quantity says that when you say something, just give exact or enough information, right? So when I say some, I mean some, right? If I want him to have all, I would say, you can have the food on the table, right? You can eat all the food. So the maximum quantity says that we should say only like what's the exact amount or what's enough information. So when I say some, it means some, right? Not all. Right? Okay, so far so good. Let's skip to number 7 as the next one. Let's skip to number 7 because number 6 needs the concept of entailment and the concept of presupposition also. So let's start out with number 7, which only asks you about the concept of entailment. So the concept of entailment, as you know, is a logical relationship between two statements, right? So if we start out with this statement, Jun Song drove a fast Ferrari, okay? So which of these sentences might be an entailment of that statement? Okay, he drove a fast Ferrari, and Jun Song here is Jun Song here. Okay, so we can just figure out the reference here. So A, Jun Song drove. Is it true? So in all cases, right, when we test, in all cases where Jun Song drove a fast Ferrari, it must be true that he drove, right? Of course, right? So A is an entailment of that statement. Okay, so A is an entailment. Okay, because in all cases where he drove a fast Ferrari, then we can assume that he must always drive. Okay. Number B, someone drove a fast car. Is it an entailment of that? In all cases where Jun Song drove a fast Ferrari, then we can say someone drove a fast car. Yes or no? Yes or no? Why don't I give you maybe 4 minutes to go through this, and then I'll ask the reason. So for those of you who say yes, tell me why you say yes. And for those of you who say no, then tell me why you say no. Okay, so for number B, what do you think? So Jun Song or someone drove a fast car, is it an entailment or not? Yes or no? Do you remember this fast car example? So just because this Ferrari is fast doesn't necessarily mean that it's a fast car, right? Let me change an example to Jun Song saw a big ant. Okay, Jun Song saw a big ant. Does it mean that someone saw a big animal? No, right? No. So in this case, a fast Ferrari is not always a fast car, right? So no entailment. If it were only Jun Song someone drove a car, then yes, it's an entailment. But when you have a fast car, it's not necessarily true. Okay? So be careful of adjective. And number C, Jun Song drove fast. Is that an entailment of Jun Song drove a fast Ferrari? No, right? No, not necessarily. He may be driving slowly, even though it's a fast car. Let's say that. Even if it's a fast car, he may be driving it slowly, right? So C is not necessarily true. B and C, not necessarily true, so not entailment. Okay? Number D, a Ferrari is a fast car. Not necessarily, right? Not necessarily. Maybe only in that particular model or that particular one, whatever. Right? Number E, some Hanyang student drove a fast car. Not so, right? Because of the fast car here. Okay. Same as number B. Okay. Even though the first part is okay, some Hanyang student, that's true. If it were only some Hanyang student drove a car, then that's an entailment. Okay. Number F, Jun Song drove an automobile. Yes, right, for sure. Number G, Jun Song did something to an automobile. Yes, right? He drove it, right? So G is also an entailment. Number 8, Jun Song is rich. In this case, no. Because someone's driving a Ferrari doesn't mean that he has to be rich. He may have inherited it from someone else. Somebody may have given it to him without him necessarily being rich, right? But in reality, so this is in this context, but in reality he's rich and he's willing to treat you guys if you ask him. That's in reality, okay? So, an entailment is only kind of a logical consequence of a statement. Okay? Let's do number 8. Number 8, I asked you to identify the presuppositions of the sentences, right? So presuppositions have to do with things that the speaker assumes before, right? Without having to necessarily say it. And presupposition is, as we said, is an entailment that projects, okay, across negation, across question, and so on. So if, for example, in A, we have the 6th Monday in September is a holiday. So what might that sentence presuppose? It presupposes that in September there are 6 Mondays, right? So in September, there are 6 Mondays, right? Which is not necessarily true in the real world, but that's what the speaker assumes, right? When he says the 6th Monday in September is a holiday, right? So he assumes because of the word the here, right? That, you know, that thing exists, right? In September. We are not talking about November or other months, but in September, the speaker takes it for granted, or he assumes that there are 6 Mondays at least, right? Because he said the 6th Monday, right? So that's the presupposition. But if you want to test whether that's true or not, meaning whether that is a real presupposition or not, you can question this, you can negate this. You can say the 6th Monday in September is not a holiday. Or you can say, is the 6th Monday in September a holiday? Or perhaps the 6th Monday in September is a holiday. Regardless of how you say it, still, that person assumes that there are at least 6 Mondays in September, okay? Number B, Kwang-kun regrets his living in Ansan. What might be a presupposition of this one? He regrets his living in Ansan. He regrets living in Ansan. So the presupposition is he lives in Ansan, right? Or maybe lived, we don't know, in Ansan. And if you want to check whether that's a presupposition of the speaker, right? Presupposition is the thinking of the speaker. So if you want to check, you can just negate this, you can just question this. Kwang-kun did not regret, Kwang-kun doesn't regret his living. Does Kwang-kun regret his living in Ansan? However you paraphrase it or however you phrase it, still, he didn't regret living in Ansan, meaning that he lived there before or whatever, right? So could you do number C to number I? And then I'll give you 5 minutes. And then tell me just one presupposition of each statement. And if you do a review, you'll find in my PowerPoint slides that there are things that trigger presuppositions. Trigger meaning there are things that cause there to be a presupposition, like definite article or possessive adjectives like my car runs fast. The speaker assumes, right, that he has a car. My car runs fast. My, for example. Or things like regret, which is affective verb, Okay? So a verb that tells you that something is true. Verbs like regret or know or is aware, for example. Or verbs that have to do with change of state, like leave. Leave meaning to go out. So what's the assumption? Okay? Or definite noun phrase like Park Geun-hye. Right? Park Geun-hye was not re-elected, meaning there was at least that person. Right? So I'll give you 5 minutes to tell me what might be the presupposition of each statement. So for number C, you guys, for number C, the president has left the building. What might be some presuppositions that you come up with? The president exists, right? So first one, the president exists. There's such a person as the president, in other words, because the here means that there exists such a person. Or he was in the building before, right? Leave, the verb to leave is a change of state verb. So when you say someone left, it means he must have been there before, okay? So one presupposition is the president exists, and another presupposition is the president was in the building before. Number D, she's glad she rejected the offer. She is glad she rejected the offer. So one of the possible presupposition is she rejected the offer, right? So that's the presupposition. Glad is a kind of factive adjective, right? If you say she is not glad, she rejected the offer, still she rejected the offer, right? So one of the presuppositions is that she rejected the offer. Okay? Whether she's glad or she's not glad, she did reject the offer. So that's the presupposition. And also, the offer exists, right? So that's another presupposition. And she got the offer, right? That's why she could reject it, right? So somebody offered something to her and she rejected. Maybe board games will be popular again. You know board games, right? Like domino, like that. Maybe board games will be popular again, right? So the key word is again, right? So one of the presuppositions is it was popular before, right? Board games were popular before. Okay? Number F, Henry didn't criticize every left-handed DJ. What might be one of the presuppositions? Henry exists, right? So there exists a person named Henry, for example, so that's the presupposition. And left-handed DJ exists, right? Left-handed DJs exist. Number G, Park Geun-hye was not re-elected. One of the presuppositions is Park Geun-hye exists, right? And what else? She was elected before, right? She was not meaning again, right? So it means she was elected before, right? Whether you say Park Geun-hye was re-elected or was not re-elected, it already assumes that she was elected before. Okay? Number H is Ta-song, who is the cutest Montessolo in Krista's class. What might be a presupposition? Ta-song exists, right? One of the presuppositions is there is such a person named Ta-song. Ta-song exists, in other words. And then another presupposition is there is a cutest Montessolo in Krista's class, right? And Krista's class exists, for example. So three presuppositions even. even if you negate it, it isn't Tasom who is the cutest Montesolo in Krista class, then still Tasom exists, the cutest Montesolo exists, but it's someone else. If you negate it, it's not Tasom, but it's someone else, like that. Number I, why doesn't Jawan have a girlfriend? What is presupposed here? When you ask something, you presuppose that, right? So it is presupposed that he doesn't have a girlfriend. So why doesn't he have a girlfriend? It means it presupposes that he doesn't have a girlfriend, okay? And Jawan exists, for example. That's another presupposition. So now we are ready to do, because you know entailment, you know presupposition, you know implicature. So we can do number 6. Number 6, I give you 2 sentences. And can you check the relationship between the 2 sentences? Whether the relationship is entailment, presupposition, and or implicature, right? So the relationship sometimes, but not necessarily, okay? Sometimes you might have both an entailment and a presupposition, okay? Because both are related, right? Presupposition is a kind of entailment, right? That projects. Presupposition is an entailment, most of the time, entailment that projects. Meaning that projects across negation and stuff, and question and stuff. So sometimes you might have both, right? You might have both relationships. But the implicature is different, right? Because it has to do with maxim. Okay? So when you check, you need to check both entailment and presupposition, and then implicature will be so different that you can just recognize it. Like number A, Bill was sorry that it rained and it rained. So what kind of relationship between Bill was sorry that it rained and it rained? The relationship is, this is easy, right? Both entailment and presupposition, right? He was sorry that it rained. In all cases that he was sorry that it rained, right? It must have rained, okay? And if you say Bill wasn't sorry that it rained, still, right, it rained. So it projects, so you have an entailment, a presupposition here. So both presupposition and entailment. But not implicature because there's no maxim involved, okay? Number B. Some of my friends like fudge. Fudge is a kind of food, a kind of dessert or snack. Some of my friends don't like fudge. So what's the relationship between the first one and the second one? Some of my friends like fudge implies that some of my friends, other friends, do not like fudge. So what kind of relationship is that? Not entailment, right? If you say some of my friends like fudge, it doesn't always mean that other people don't like fudge, right? It could mean no one, right? It could mean everyone, for example, right, that likes fudge. So it's not entailment and it doesn't project. If you ask a question out of it, do some of my friends like fudge, right? It doesn't imply that some of my friends do not like fudge. So there's no relationship. No entailment or presupposition, but it's an implicature, okay? When you say some of my friends like fudge, only some, right? Only some. So it means other people, right? Other people may not like fudge. So that's the implicature, okay? Which has to do with the maxim of quantity, right? Quantity meaning number. You say, you give the exact amount of information, right? And leave the rest for the reader or for the hearer to figure out. So if you say only some, if you say that only some like fudge, so the hearer or the reader can imply that, can infer that other people might not like, because you give it to that amount of information which is necessarily, right, true for that particular situation. So there's like this scale, no to some to all, right? So when we say things, right, the cooperative principle says that we should give enough information, right? Quantity, maximum quantity. So if there is all, you would have said all. If there's no, you would have said no. If there's some, you would have said some. So whatever we give is just enough, just right information. So you cannot infer above it, but you can infer like down below and so on. Okay. Number C, Gil-ho remembered to call and Gil-ho was planning to call. What's the relationship between the two statements here? What's the meaning of plan? Plan means to intend to do something, right? To intend to do something. And remember, does it entail planning? When you remember to do something, does it involve intention? You remember to lock the door, right? It means you must have some intention to do it, right? For sure. So in all cases where he remembered to call, then it must mean that he must have intention to call, which is planning. So this is entailment, okay? Does it project or not? Does it project or not? Can you negate the sentence? Gil-ho didn't remember to call? Or can you make it into a question? Did Gil-ho remember to call? Or perhaps Gil-ho remembered to call. Modalize it. Does it project? Still the intention is there or not? Did he remember to call? He didn't remember to call. So is the intention still there? Yes. So it projects. So it is also a presupposition. Okay. Number D. Al Kyung-won managed to lead the ELL, English Language and Literature soccer team to victory. It was difficult for Al Kyung-won to do so. So, but in fact, we lost. What's the relationship between the two? Entailment and presupposition, or entailment or presupposition? In all cases where he managed to lead the soccer team to victory, it was difficult, right? The fact that it was difficult. So it's entailment, and also it does project, right? If you say he didn't manage to lead the team to victory, or did he manage to lead the team to victory, still it involves some kind of difficulty, because manage conveys the fact that it's difficult, right? So in this case, you have both the entailment and presupposition, okay? So when it does project, then you have presupposition. Number E, and I'll have you do the rest. Number E, the movie is good and the movie is not excellent. What's the relationship between the movie is good and the movie is not excellent? Is it an entailment? In all cases where the movie is good, it must be that it's not excellent. Is it true? In all cases where P, the movie is good, it must be the movie is not excellent. Is it true or not? If it's true, then you have an entailment. If it's not true, then you don't have an entailment. In all cases where the movie is good, it must be that it's not excellent. No, right? Because it's good could also mean that it's excellent. Could also mean, right, that it's excellent. So there's no entailment here. There's no entailment, right? So there shouldn't be any presupposition, right? Is the movie good? It doesn't mean the movie is not excellent, right? So there's no presupposition, there's no entailment. But what there might be is the implicature, right? When someone says the movie is good, meaning it's just good, right? This is the maximum of quantity again, right? So you just give enough information. If it's good, then if you say that it's good, then that's just enough information in your opinion, right? So the hearer or the reader can imply that it's not excellent because you stop here at good, and that's just the right information, maximum quantity, right? So, and this is just bad. So it's the maximum quantity standard implicature that gives rise to the implicature that is not excellent. Because if it were excellent, you would have said it was excellent like that, right? Tom's dog is a golden poodle, and Tom has a dog. In fact, he has a golden poodle. So in this case, what's the relationship between the first statement and the second statement? He has a dog, is both entailment and presupposition, right? So when you say Tom's dog here, right, it's specific noun phrase, definite noun phrase, so you assume that he has a dog. Even though you negated Tom's dog is not a golden poodle, still his dog is not. It still assumes that he has a dog. So it's both entailment and presupposition. It's entailment, and also it projects, so it's a presupposition as well. So number G, we can still finish these two off. The Beckhams have separated, and the Beckhams have not divorced. What might be the relationship between the two? If you modalize it, or if you question it, make it into a question, then the second statement doesn't stay, right? Perhaps the Beckhams have separated. The second statement is not there anymore. So the relationship is, again, implicature, that of an implicature. And it has to do with the maximum quantity again, right? When you say separated, and you stop there, separated is like the midway, separated, but not necessarily divorced, right? So you stop there, you give just that information. So the hearer can just infer that, well, they must not be divorced, right? They have just separated. So because you just give that amount of information is the maximum quantity. Number H, Junsong is chatting with a woman at the club, and the implied message is that woman is not his girlfriend. So what might be the relationship between the two? Implicature again, right? Because again, it has to do with the maximum quantity, right? That you just give that amount of information with a woman at the club, right? So if it were his girlfriend, then the speaker would have said he's chatting with his girlfriend, right? So in this case, he just stopped there with the woman at the club, so the maximum quantity tells us that that woman is not his girlfriend. Okay? So next time we'll come back and finish off this review, and we'll just do a wrap up for the class.